In 1979, Honda wheeled a brand new Grand Prix bike onto the grid at Silverstone. The founder of the company personally flew in to watch, and within the first lap, the thing caught fire and slid off into the grass. Now, that bike had an engine unlike anything in racing history. Its pistons weren't round. They were oval, shaped like tiny running tracks, and every cylinder breathed through 8 valves instead of the usual 4. Honda had built something that breathed suspiciously like a V8, then squinted at the rulebook and convinced it the thing was still a V4. It cost an absolute fortune. It never won a single Grand Prix, and when it was all over, Honda quietly buried it and pretended to move on. But here's the strange part. Losing this badly turned out to be one of the smartest things the company ever did. This is the story of the Honda NR, the most magnificent failure they ever built. To understand why Honda did something this insane, you have to go back to 1967, when they walked away from motorcycle Grand Prix racing at the absolute top of the sport. The year before, in 1966, Honda had become the first manufacturer to win every solo world championship class in a single season. Every one. Then they put the bikes in a corner and spent the next decade obsessing over cars. So when Honda announced in late 1977 that they were finally coming back to the premier 500 cubic centimeter class, the expectation was simple. The Kings were returning. They would build something brilliant and clean up. There was just one problem. While Honda was off making cars, the entire 500 cubic centimeter grid had switched to 2-stroke engines. And 2-strokes were, frankly, the smart choice. They were lighter by something like 20 kilograms. They had no camshafts and no valves to worry about. And because a 2-stroke fires on every single revolution of the engine instead of every other one, it made big power without much fuss. Every serious team in the championship was running them. The logical move for Honda was obvious. Build a 2-stroke, beat them at their own game, go home with the trophy. Honda refused. And the reason they refused comes down to one very stubborn man. Soichiro. Honda, the founder, genuinely despised 2-stroke engines. By several accounts, he dismissed them as noisy, smoky, smelly little things, and he was not about to abandon his beloved 4-strokes just to win a few races. So Honda's marketing department and Honda's racing department were suddenly handed a mission that was less about sport and more about philosophy. Prove that a 4-stroke could beat the 2-strokes, win the right way, or don't bother winning at all. You can already see where this is heading. The trouble is, physics did not care about Soichiro Honda's feelings. A 4-stroke only fires every other revolution, so to match a 2-stroke's power, it basically has to rev twice as hard. And the cleanest way to rev that hard is to use lots of tiny cylinders, because small, light pistons can move faster without tearing themselves apart. Honda's engineers looked at the math and decided what they really wanted was a V8. More cylinders, smaller pistons, higher revs, more power. Perfect, except the rulebook said no. The governing body, the FIM, limited 500 cubic centimeter machines to a maximum of 4 cylinders. That rule existed specifically to stop manufacturers from building exotic, expensive multi-cylinder monsters, which is exactly what Honda wanted to build. On paper, the rule completely killed the 4-stroke dream. You cannot beat a 2-stroke V4 with a 4-stroke V4. The 2-stroke fires twice as often. It's not a fair fight. But then, somebody at Honda read that rule very, very carefully. The rule limited the number of cylinders. It said absolutely nothing about what shape the pistons inside those cylinders had to be. And that little loophole is where this entire beautiful disaster was born. If they couldn't have 8 cylinders, fine. They would build 4 cylinders and then cram the guts of a V8 inside them. The internal brief Honda gave the team was almost charmingly ambitious. Create innovative technology through racing, develop young engineers into future leaders, and become world champion within 3 years. Spoiler, they would achieve exactly 2 of those 3 things, and not the one you'd expect. So let's talk about how an oval piston actually works, because it's simpler than it sounds. Picture 2 normal round pistons sitting side by side. Now imagine squishing them together until they melt into a single oblong shape, like a running track or a stretched out oval. That's the oval piston. By stretching the piston out like that, each cylinder got room for 8 valves, 4 to let fuel in and 4 to let exhaust out, plus 2 spark plugs. Exactly like a V8 cylinder. Multiply that across all 4 cylinders, and you get 32 valves in a single engine, which was an unheard of number for a 500 cubic centimeter bike. Of course, a long oval piston has a nasty habit of wanting to rock and twist sideways in its cylinder. So Honda gave each piston not 1 connecting rod, but 2, just to keep the thing pointing in the right direction. The result was a V4 that borrowed a surprising amount of V8 thinking. The internal code name was simply 0X, and the targets were genuinely bananas. One of the lead engineers, Mr. Fukui, calculated that the engine could theoretically spin to 23,000 revolutions per minute and make 130 horsepower, at least on paper. For reference, most road bikes today are tapping out somewhere around 10 or 11,000 revolutions per minute. Honda wanted to more than double that, so that was the dream on paper. A 4-stroke that revved like nothing else on the grid, an engine that would shut Soichiro's critics up forever. Now Honda just had to actually build the thing. And this is where the story stops being clever and starts being painful. Because it turns out, when you build a piston shaped like a running track, you inherit every single engineering problem at once. Start with the piston rings. On a normal round piston, the rings are circles, and sealing a circle is a solved problem we have had for a century. But an oval has long, flat sides and tight curved ends, and getting a ring to seal tightly along that whole weird shape was, at first, nearly impossible. The early engines leaked so much pressure past those flat sides that they needed an enormous breather just to vent it all. Hold that detail in your head, because that breather is about to ruin a very important day. Then there was the machining, where a flat side meets a curved end. The metal has these awkward transition points that are genuinely difficult to cut and polish accurately. Honda had to farm out production to a specialist division just to make the parts at all. And even when they got the engine running, it had a charming tendency to disintegrate above 10,000 revolutions per minute, which, you will remember, is less than half of its target. The twin connecting rods would cause the piston to twist, the long wrist pins would flex, and bits would simply break. One engineer, a man named Yoshimura, kept a drawer full of snapped connecting rods and shattered valves as souvenirs. Years later, he admitted he was never quite sure whether they had been pioneering cutting-edge technology or just obsessed with a foolish idea. Honestly, an extremely reasonable thing to wonder while staring at a drawer of broken metal. And here is the cruel irony of the whole concept. The entire point of going 4-stroke was supposed to be elegance and refinement. Instead, building in enough strength to survive made the engine heavier by around 20 kilograms, the exact same weight penalty that made everyone choose 2 strokes in the first place. Honda had set out to prove the 4-stroke was better, and step 1 was lugging around an extra 20 kilograms, off to a flawless start. But you have to understand, Honda did not do anything halfway. The NR500 was not just an exotic engine bolted into a normal bike. Honda used it as an excuse to throw every single futuristic idea they had at one machine. The frame was not a frame in the normal sense. It was a monocoque, an aluminium shell that some people compared to a shrimp, where the bodywork itself was the structure, and the engine slid up into it like a cartridge. They ran 16-inch wheels when everyone else used 18. They experimented with exotic carbon brake technology, upside-down forks, a rising rate rear suspension linkage, and a slipper clutch to stop the rear wheel hopping under hard downshifts. If you know modern bikes, you just heard a list of features that are completely standard on a MotoGP machine today. Honda was building all of that in 1979. They were right about nearly everything. They were just 10 or 20 years early and trying to debut it all at once on the same bike in the same season. What could possibly go wrong? Which brings us finally to Silverstone. The British Grand Prix, August 1979, Honda's grand return. Soichiro Honda himself in the paddock to watch his four-stroke crusade take on the two-stroke heathens. Riding the bikes were Mick Grant and Takazumi Katayama. The whole motorcycle world was watching. It went poorly. Almost immediately, Mick Grant crashed at the very first corner. Why? Because oil from that giant crankcase breather had sprayed straight onto his rear tire. And the tire did exactly what tires do when you coat them in oil. There was even a small fire, and a marshal had to come trotting over with a fire extinguisher. Now, Grant later explained that the bikes were so unready that they only carried enough fuel for a handful of laps, and he had basically been told to put on a bit of a show and then quietly pull in. But he accidentally made things worse, because he was sitting so far back on the seat that he pulled the NR's first ever wheelie, and lifting the front like that tilted the bike enough to drop the breather tube below the oil level, which pumped oil directly onto his own back tire. Afterwards, the engineer Mr. Fukui gave him one note, and it is the most Honda note imaginable: no more wheelies. His teammate Katayama did not fare much better, retiring with ignition problems. Soichiro Honda had flown across the world to watch his masterpiece slide into the grass on fire. It somehow got worse. 3 weeks later, at the French Grand Prix at Le Mans, both NR500s failed to even qualify. They could not make the grid. Yoshimura, the engineer, said he felt miserable, just miserable, that tears welled up in his eyes, standing there watching every other bike on track running the two-stroke engines Honda had so proudly refused to build. The press, never a kind bunch, took the bike's initials, NR, and decided they actually stood for Never Ready. And that name stuck because for a couple of years it was painfully accurate. So Honda did what Honda does. They put their heads down and ground at the problem. The clever monocoque chassis was abandoned because the mechanics could not actually get to the engine. Changing something as basic as a carburetor jet meant taking large chunks of the bike apart, which is not ideal when you are trying to fix a temperamental engine between sessions. They went back to a normal tubular steel frame, built in Britain. The 16-inch wheels went back to 18-inch wheels, and slowly, stubbornly, the power crept up. 100 horsepower, then 110, then 120. Eventually, they hit that magic 130 horsepower target, with later versions reportedly making even more, while screaming to nearly 20,000 revolutions per minute. Behind the scenes, there was a secret off-site night shift of mechanics rebuilding these fragile engines, and a single rebuild could take 10 hours. 10 hours for an engine that might let go again the next time it passed 10,000 revolutions per minute. And here is the gut punch after all of that effort. Across roughly 3 on and off seasons of Grand Prix racing, the NR500 never won a single Grand Prix, not one, and it never scored a single solitary World Championship point. Its best results in the World Championship were a couple of finishes way down in 12th and 13th place. A young American named Freddie Spencer once got it running as high as 5th at the British Grand Prix before mechanical trouble intervened again. It was not completely winless everywhere. Back home in Japan, a rider named Kengo Kiyama actually won a national race at Suzuka in 1981, the Oval Pistons' first real victory. And he partly won it because the fuel-sipping four-stroke could skip a pit stop the thirsty two-strokes had to make. Spencer even won a heat race in America, beating the legendary Kenny Roberts before the engine expired in the final. So there were flashes, glimpses, tiny moments where you could see the dream working, but it was not enough, and Honda knew it. So in 1982, they did the unthinkable. They built a two-stroke, the NS500, the exact kind of engine Soichiro Honda had spent years refusing to build, and almost immediately it worked. In 1983, Freddie Spencer rode Honda's two-stroke to the company's first 500 cubic centimeter world championship since their return. The NR Oval Piston, the four-stroke Crusade, the running track pistons, the 32 valves, and the night shifts was quietly rolled into a corner and shelved. On every scoreboard that mattered, it was a total, expensive, embarrassing failure. If you are enjoying this slow-motion engineering disaster, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I dig into the weird, ambitious, gloriously doomed corners of motorcycle history every week, and the next part of the story is where the whole thing flips. Because the NR was about to fail its way into legend. See, Honda is a lot of things, but they are not great at letting go. The oval piston refused to die. They brought it back, bored out to 750 cubic centimeters, as an endurance racing engine. And as an endurance racer, the thing was suddenly fast. At the 1987 Le Mans 24 Hours, the oval piston NR750 qualified second, just a whisker behind Honda's own conventional factory bike, the RVF 750. It showed genuinely frightening pace before retiring a few hours in, and the failure that time was not even a design flaw. It was a single loose bolt on a connecting rod, an assembly mistake. The engine itself was a marvel by then, making around 155 horsepower, roughly 20 more than the conventional bike, while being barely an inch wider and only a few pounds heavier. After all those years, the oval piston had finally become genuinely good. Then, at the end of 1987, two of these NR750s went down to Australia for a series of races, and a Tasmanian rider named Malcolm Campbell did something the oval piston had been chasing for nearly a decade. He won. An outright race win at Calder Park, plus more podiums, and a third place overall in the series. After 8 years of fires and tears and broken connecting rods and the nickname Never Ready, the oval piston finally crossed a finish line in first place. And almost as if the universe had a sense of comedic timing, subsequent rule changes then effectively closed the door on oval pistons in international racing for good. The concept had finally proven itself. Right as the door was quietly shutting on it, you genuinely could not write it better. So that should have been the end. A weird footnote, an expensive lesson. Except Honda had one more move, and it's the one that turned the NR from an embarrassment into an icon. In 1992, they took the oval piston and put it on the road. They built a street-legal production motorcycle called the NR750, and it remains, to this day, the only oval piston motorcycle Honda ever sold to the public. Engraved right on the fuel tank were the words, "The result of a decade's perfection." Honda was not being subtle, and the bike was unbelievable. Underneath it ran a 748 cubic centimeter V4 with the full oval piston treatment, 8 valves, and 2 connecting rods per cylinder. Except now the valves and the connecting rods were made of titanium. It had fuel injection so advanced it was the first Japanese sport bike with a fully mapped multi-point system. The bodywork was carbon fiber. The screen was titanium coated. It had a single-sided swing arm, an exhaust that exited under the seat, magnesium wheels, and a digital dashboard that used a clever mirror trick to make the readouts appear to float at a distance, so the rider's eyes would not have to refocus from the road to the gauges. Each individual piston ring required 27 separate machining operations to produce. The pistons were nickel-plated and Teflon coated. This was engineering for the sheer obsessive joy of engineering. And if that single-sided swing arm and underseat exhaust sound familiar, it's because the legendary designer Massimo Tamburini openly admitted the NR inspired his Ducati 916, one of the most beautiful motorcycles ever made. The failure was already influencing icons. Now here is the number that made the NR750 famous: the price. In Japan, it sold for 5 million yen. In the United States, somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000. In Britain, roughly £37,000. To put that in perspective, it cost about 5 times as much as Honda's brilliant new CBR 900RR Fireblade, a bike that was faster around a track in every measurable way. The NR was, at launch, among the most expensive production motorcycles ever offered, and Honda barely made any. Depending on which source you trust, somewhere around 300 of them were ever built before production quietly ended. Honda almost certainly did not make a profit on a single one. That was never the point. The point was to take everything that disastrous racing project had taught them and cast it in titanium and carbon fiber as a kind of rolling monument. And those monuments have aged rather well. A clean NR750 today regularly sells for 6 figures at auction, with the very best examples reportedly reaching as high as $150,000. The failure, it turns out, was a fantastic investment. But the road bike is just the trophy. The real victory, the thing that makes this entire saga a secret success, is what happened to the people and the knowledge. Because Honda made a very deliberate, very strange choice when they staffed the NR project. They filled it with rookies, young engineers who knew almost nothing about racing. The team leader Satoru Horiike later said they were almost all new people who knew next to nothing about the sport. Honda took its most ambitious, most impossible project and handed it to beginners as a trial by fire, and those beginners went on to run the company. The NR project leader, Takeo Fukui, became the president of Honda Motor itself, running the entire global corporation in the 2000s. Another NR engineer, Suguru Kanazawa, went on to lead HRC, Honda's racing division. Horiike became a managing director there too. These were the people forged by the oval piston. And listen to how they talk about it. Kanazawa said plainly, "The NR 500 was our teacher." Horiike went further, saying they learned so much, especially how to solve problems, that he would never call the bike a mistake. He called the project a success. They lost every race that mattered and called it a success. And the wild thing is, they were right, because the lessons did not stay locked in a drawer with Yoshimura's broken parts. They spread through everything Honda built afterward. The NR 500 was Honda's very first V4 engine, and that V-shaped architecture became the family DNA of every great Honda racer that followed, running straight through the championship-winning bikes of the 80s and 90s, all the way to the V engines that have dominated modern MotoGP, the exotic brake materials, the slipper clutch, the obsessive use of titanium and magnesium to shave weight, the back torque limiting clutch that went on to debut on a production Honda. All of that knowledge was bought and paid for by the NR. You can even see echoes of the oval pistons valve experiments in a Honda system called REV, which arrived in 1983 and itself anticipated ideas that would eventually appear in VTEC, the variable valve technology Honda still puts in cars and bikes today. An entire generation of Honda's best ideas can trace its ancestry back to the engine that kept catching fire at Silverstone. And now for the final perfect irony, the one that ties this whole thing in a bow. The man who invented the oval piston in the first place was a brilliant engineer named Shoichiro Irimajiri, the genius behind some of Honda's most legendary engines. And Irimajiri was also the man who eventually authorized Honda to give up and build the two-stroke that actually won the championship. He created the dream, and he was honest enough to pull the plug on it, because to him, the goal was always to win by the shortest path available. So Honda only became 500 cubic centimeter champions after they swallowed their pride and built the exact stinky two-stroke bikes their founder hated. Soichiro's crusade, in the short term, completely failed. But the four-stroke faith never actually died. It just went dormant and waited. Because in 2002, the rules of MotoGP changed, and the Premier class switched from two strokes back to four strokes. Suddenly, high-revving four-stroke engines were once again the future of Premier class racing, the exact direction Honda had bled for back in 1979. And Honda, the company that had spent a decade and a fortune learning how to make four strokes win, walked in and started cleaning up. The discipline of not racing before you're ready, the deep knowledge of valves and materials and revs, the V-engine DNA, all of it was waiting, fully paid for, decades in advance. So was the NR a failure? On the scoreboard, absolutely. It never won a Grand Prix. It never scored a championship point. It challenged engineering common sense at every turn, and Honda buried it. But it trained the men who would run the company. It pioneered many technologies and design ideas that later became commonplace. It produced one of the most exotic and valuable motorcycles ever made, and it kept a four-stroke flame alive just long enough for the sport to come full circle and hand Honda the keys. They lost the race, but they absolutely won the war, and that running track-shaped piston, the one everyone laughed at, might just be the most expensive lesson that ever paid for itself. If you want more stories about the gloriously stubborn machines that should never have worked but somehow changed everything, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.